Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back. And now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Happy, merry, almost Christmas, almost New Year. We're getting there. We're getting to the point of putting 2023 behind us. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to an amazing human being who I just adore. We met this week on her podcast. She had me on her podcast, and then immediately I turned around and had her on mine because I just love talking to her so much. You may know her as an actress. She's been on tons of stuff on TV and film, and she is a mom, and she lives with bipolar disorder, and she is a mental health advocate. And she's just an extraordinary human, and I've really loved talking to her. Her name is Alessandra Torresani, and she is the coolest. So here is my conversation with Alessandra Torresani. Alessandra Torresani, I'm so happy to have you here. You're a mom, you're an actor, you're a mental health advocate. This is all like there's a lot here. You're somewhat of a new mom.
A new mom, as you can hear my baby right here, like silently sleeping next to me. So very much a new mom in the sense of, 17 months. So I feel like that's still fairly new. I keep calling her my newborn, and I'm like, wait, that's not right. She's not a newborn, but
Oh wait, she's walking and talking.
I saw this mom yesterday, and she was pregnant, and she said, I think she was like 7 months pregnant or something, and it was at an event. And I was like, oh, how are you feeling? Because everyone asks like, oh my God, are you so excited? But I feel like people don't ask moms, how are you really? Like, how are you really doing?
Oh,
because
yeah, 100%.
It's a journey. And she was like, oh, everything is great and rainbows and butterflies. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm a new mom too. And then I like spit out 17 months, and I was like, oh, that's not a new mom anymore.
Every day feels new when your kids are so little. Every day feels new, right? Totally. I mean, insanity. You're a mental health advocate. You are very open with your own struggles.
I live with bipolar 1 disorder and thriving.
And you were talking about how like the first year of marriage is really hard for anyone.
Sure.
Can you talk about that? Like what you experienced in that first year?
I mean, I would say it even goes through pregnancy, right? Where I feel like the reason why I'm so excited to talk to you about, all of this fun, D word stuff, even though I'm not getting a divorce, I am a product of divorce. So I am someone that understands what that's like to be the child side of it all. But the thing that I was so frustrated and I found myself so angry about was that people don't talk about how hard pregnancy is and how hard postpartum is on your marriage or on your partnership, right? I'll say that in general. Your hormones are doubling by the day, and you are, forget if you have a mental illness like I do, like let's just live in a world where everything is rainbows and butterflies like this other mom,
right? Whatever weird unicorn.
There's so much that you're going through. Your body is changing so much. You're losing your identity. You don't know, am I still, Alessandra? Am I just a mom now? Can I still be sexy and still like post, naughty Instagram posts of me, feeling hot out on a day out? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You don't know who you are. you lose friendships, you gain friendships, you kind of lose that relationship that used to be with your partner, and it becomes something new. And it's like a death, I would say, right? It's a death of who you used to be, and finding out if this new person who you are can fit well and mesh well with your partner. Like it's a lot. Even if you never had issues before, you're going to find there's issues.
I think it's really well said what you're talking about, because it is so important to any transition, right? Even if it's the most glorious transition, like motherhood, giving birth, which I mean, glorious and also, right? Like, but like we pretend it's all glorious, right? And so we don't ask new mothers, are you okay?
Right.
I mean, I'll never forget walking into for my 2-week, I think it was my 2-week checkup postpartum. And literally my OB said, how are you? And I lost it. And I burst into tears and I couldn't stop crying. And she was like, okay, here you go. Take this, fill it downstairs, And I was like, oh, thank God. And I didn't even know in that moment, until someone asked me, how are you, that I was not okay.
And let me tell you, that's so rare, because doctors and physicians do not ask, how are you really? They don't. You go in for that 6-week postpartum checkup and they're like, okay, you're good to go. You can go have sex now. And you're like, pardonnez-moi, like, let me take a moment. Like, there is nothing that is going inside me right now because I am in such emotional pain. I can't even imagine what that would be like. You know what I mean? And that's what I found to be so frustrating is, that's it. You go to all these appointments when you're pregnant, you're there all the time up until the very end. You're there once a week. And then all of a sudden they're like, we see you once, you're good to go. Go have fun. Like, go have sex, like come back when you're pregnant again, and you're just like, you feel like you're almost like just like a piece of meat at that point.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I never like to project that this is the experience for all pregnancies or this is the experience for all postpartums, because I'll never forget like running into someone and being like, oh my God, how are you doing? Like, I'm a mess. Like I also dealt with a lot of issues postpartum with postpartum hemorrhaging, and I was in and out of the hospital. So there were a lot of traumatic things that had happened that I didn't realize were as traumatic as they were until here we are now in the present, and I'm dealing with it.
Right.
Like a year later. But I would go up to women and be like, oh my God, are you okay? Like, oh my God. And then this happened and this happened. And I would like trauma dump. And I didn't know that that's what I was doing. And some women are like, no, I had a beautiful, no medication birth experience, and my baby's an angel and it never cried. And the rainbow, it's a rainbows and butterflies again, and you're just like, what? So
those are people that I almost want to like if they had said that to me, if anyone had said that to me when I was in the thick of my like birth and recovery and postpartum trauma, I might have punched them.
Right. And I think it's also confusing because for me, I was like, wait, why are other people not experiencing what I'm experiencing? And I would see friends who gave birth around the same time that I did, and they would be working out and they would be back at the gym and stuff.
Right.
And I have yet to relive that life again of like being a worker outer, and I just remember being so frustrated, and I would cry and I would cry and I would cry and I would cry to my husband and say, it's not fair.
Yeah.
I did everything right. I carried the baby.
Right.
I was healthy. I got off my medication. I, had a great birth. And then, there were issues afterwards, but I did all the work. Why can I not do this? Why can't I be normal again?
Yes.
And that's something that I think, I will say many, many, many women have come forward since my podcast and me talking about it, have said that, why am I not who I used to be? Why am I not the old Alessandra,
Yeah, right.
Because that's not existent anymore. It never will be existent because your heart is outside of your body now. And you don't realize that. You add that and then add any little bit part of a marriage where there might be some issues, and you see why a lot of people within the first year get divorces, because it was something that I would throw out the word divorce all the time to my husband, and I love him dearly, but I was so frustrated. I didn't know who I was, what I was. Would I ever be the same again? I was just so angry and so lonely. Even though I had so much of a support system, I felt so internally lonely. And I think that that's what we forget about mom and motherhood, is that it can be such a lonely journey, even if you have a great support system.
Yes. And I think that it's an experience that men, try as they might, like they cannot understand the experience that we have, like absolutely cannot. And so it feels so lonely because you're the only one in your home. You're the only one in the partnership who understands, who feels the way you're feeling. And even if you have friends who, again, like may have had different birth experiences and not had birth trauma, or even if they have, it's different, whatever it is, like those people are not in your home. Right. They're not with you at, 4:00 in the morning while you're like crying and nursing. It's so incredibly isolating. And you have changed. You've changed on a cellular level. Your cells are now no longer the same. Yep. Like literally not the same. Yeah. And your DNA has changed, and your entire being has changed from the inside out. And to align those things, and, like what we were talking about, like all transitions, this is a transition, whether it was joyous or really traumatic, like it was for you and for me, we don't give it, we have to give that weight, right? We have to, all transitions require the giving up of something, require the grieving of something that we are letting go of.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Even when we graduate high school, right? It's joyous. It's wonderful. It's all exciting. It's a transition. We have to mourn the loss of, being a kid or being with the people that we loved and, all of our friends and all of those things. And we so often don't, like, we just sort of gloss over the whole thing.
Yeah. And we don't remember, like, to give ourselves grace, because I am the best person at giving advice. I'm the best person at like telling you a quote that, will stick with you. And then for myself, I'm like, oh, I don't listen to shit. Like, I don't listen to my advice. Like, I should listen to my show, and then maybe I'd be a little better off.
Oh,
but like,
listen, same.
That's what happens, right?
Right.
And you also, I think, I will speak for moms and women and men, like moms and husbands situation, because that's what I'm in. I won't speak for anyone else, but I will say it's also so frustrating because you do so much, for this baby. You're breastfeeding, you're eating well, like the journey doesn't stop after you give birth. It continues. And I remember even quite recently just being so upset because my husband had to go away for a work trip, for a business trip. And I only had to set up an interview. Like, I only do interviews about once or twice a week now. Like, I used to just get them out all the time. I had so much free time. I was like, whatever, Yeah. And now if we don't have my mom watching and he can't watch, we don't have a babysitter, we don't have a nanny. Like, it's literally me,
Right.
And I remember saying, oh, okay, by the way, I have an interview tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. or something, just so you know. I don't need you to watch her, but I just, I'm just letting you know. And he's like, oh, well, that like is such a hard time because that's when I'm supposed to go and take the shower, and then I'm getting picked up from work and all this stuff. And I remember like just being so angry at him because I was like, you don't have to know what the schedule is like for a baby. Like, mothers never have to like be like, here's our schedule, like, let's work it out together. If you're still married, the men just assume, well, in the morning she's got to breastfeed, so she's going to be with the mom, so I don't have to have a schedule.
I don't have to, right.
I don't have to think about that. She'll let me know when she needs me, but it's not like I just expect you to get up and just take care of the baby. And I think that adds a lot of stress if you don't know how to properly communicate that,
Right. Right.
That was like a new conversation for us of like, you don't have to worry about a schedule because you have me, so we need to figure something out, but like you said, every day is a new day, and it's a new conversation, and it's a new stress level that you have to get over, and you communicate, which I'm very lucky we communicate well, or it leads to a separation, and it leads to a divorce.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is in all of these transitions, we must communicate what's happening. We must be able to say, oh, wow, you know what just happened there? We just had this thing where it's like, I felt like you were just sort of taking it for granted that I was in charge and that everything would be fine. And there was no thought to my life and my schedule. And we have a baby. And so like, there's an expectation that I'm taking care of everything. That really doesn't work for me. How can we as a couple solve this problem, right? And this is a huge distinction from you did this and you did that and you're an asshole and blah, blah, blah. It's, as a couple,
right,
in this relationship, in this marriage, we have a new thing that we have to figure out, right? Is a different conversation. And then, for me, I always say like, having the conversation is really important, but how they respond to it, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Yeah. And so you're married to someone who was like, oh shit. Yeah. I didn't think about that. But really it's the communication, right? It's saying like, hey, I feel this way, right? And when your partner says, oh shit, I'm so sorry, then you're like, okay. I don't have to get that divorce that I've been thinking about in my head because I was so fucking full of resentment and rage, right?
It was interesting that you had talked about, and I thought this was so cool, how it's always a shock to the partner when there's a divorce. I brought this up to my mom because I thought this was so interesting. And she was like, yep. Moms, we think about it over and over and over. Like it's constantly in our head. And I've constantly like said that word before without it having like true grit and meaning, it's been like, and maybe that's wrong that I've said the word, but it's like out of frustration, out of anxiety, out of postpartum stress, it will come out and be like, oh, just be easier if we have a divorce. Sometimes it'll like come out like that. But it is interesting how you said it's always a surprise to the partner, right? To the man, like, oh, wait. And it's like, I've been saying this for years and you don't see it coming, Right. And it was interesting because my mom was like, oh yeah, no, totally. I get that. Like that, that makes total sense. You talk about it all the time. Why is that?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, like, I love how you just turned this around to you interviewing me again.
No, because I wanted to clarify it with my mom. This is my mom's question.
I think it's hilarious. No, I think it's great. Mostly because you've been bringing it up so much and you haven't done anything about it. Yeah. Right? Like you keep threatening it, but you're not doing it. So when I finally told my ex, I don't know if I told you this on your show. I don't think I did. That when I finally told my ex, like 2 weeks later, he came to me and he was like, I'm so sorry. I just never thought you'd leave. You guys should see Alessandra's face right now.
How long were you contemplating it?
Oh, years. And we had talked, and we talked about it in therapy, and I had been like, I'm actually done. And then he was supposed to be like winning me back, but then he didn't really do anything. And so then I was like, oh no, I'm actually done. And then he was like, oh, basically what he said was, I just thought I could keep getting away with I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was treating you badly. I just didn't think I had to change. I thought I could keep getting away with it.
Wow.
But he had gotten away with it for 10 years. So like, why wouldn't he think that?
As a new mom, like, I think that, my biggest fear always, like when it came to divorce is, which I never understood. And I say this isn't my mom's experience, but I think of it this way in the sense of, my mom and dad were married until I was about 15, and then they got separated, and then I had a falling out with my dad, and then they had the divorce came a little bit later, but I mean, it was just because it was paperwork. Like they weren't together starting at 15. And I remember always, when I was young, internalizing being like, oh, they should have done this when I was younger, like, because it would have been easier, And I remember on the podcast, I had asked you, when your parents got divorced, and you said, I was so young, like I didn't know any different. But then I wonder, like, how can, like, for me, like my struggle always would be like, but I don't want to lose 50% of that time with my child. Right. And so like, Absolutely. What do you say, like, to someone like me, like who would be like not that I'm in this situation, but I mean, that is something that I always would be like, I wouldn't get a divorce strictly because of that, because I'm so enmeshed in my child. Like I can't imagine.
Oh, listen, 100%. And I think it's really valid. And I think there's a couple of things, right? It's especially when they're little, when they're 17 months old, like your mom and you are everything. And so to be honest, if it's like, I can't do this anymore, like I literally can't do this anymore, and I literally have to get divorced, but I'm scared of the time away from my child. Right. So we're like stepping over, like we're assuming this is now something that has to happen. Right. As opposed to still in the deciding. I would say, first of all, for an infant, for someone as young or a toddler, I would not recommend a 50-50 split at that point, right? Like there would be a step up approach to this where you would have primary custody, as long as, your spouse was amenable to that and understood that was what was best for the child. A lot of judges will look at now they're just moving to 50-50. It's sort of a blanket thing and it's ridiculous. But for young ones, right, we want to keep their life as consistent as possible. And so ripping a child away first of all, it's massive attachment wound, right? This is not okay. It's not
assume. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so a child who is so deeply bonded with their mother, we don't want to do that. We want to wait until, maybe do a 70-30 for a while. Right. And then every other weekend, maybe go and have a sleepover at dad's. Right. Or one night, 1 or 2 nights a week, have a sleepover with daddy. How fun. Right.
Yeah.
It's like that. Until they're probably maybe 3 or 4 and there can be a more of a consistent schedule, but you phase and ease into that. You don't just dump a child into it. That's just, I think, terrible. And then that also gives you the chance to ease into that separation, right? The first couple of nights away are terrifying and tragic.
Oh my God. I could only imagine and it breaks my heart when I see that. And I always wonder, how do moms who are breastfeeding,
well, we don't. I mean, well, there was a judge who just ruled. I mean, this is our fucking country, right? There was a judge who just ruled that a woman had to give up breastfeeding in order to have 50-50 custody. And this
my gosh.
I think it was in Florida, but because Florida. I can't remember where it was, but it was somewhere like that.
Wow.
I mean, but fucking awful. Fucking awful, right? This is why we want to stay out of court if at all possible, because this is the kind of shit that judges who don't have any training in child development or anything like that, they make decisions like this that are just not in the they always talk about what's in the best interest of the children without actually having any training or information on what's actually best for children.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. Wait, that's me. I know I have a lot of podcast episodes for you to get through, and it can be really, really overwhelming to try and figure out where to start or to comb through which ones might be appropriate for you, whether you're trying to decide whether to stay or go, or you're already on the other side of the divorce process. How do you know what to listen to? I have solved the problem for you. All you have to do is go to kateanthony.com/playlist. Answer a few short questions, and I will send you a curated list of podcast episodes to best support you as you navigate these tricky waters. I'll also help you identify where you currently stand on this journey and what's ahead, with resources to help you move through this process with knowledge and grace. So all you need to do is go to kateanthony.com/playlist, answer a few short questions, and you will have your curated list of podcast episodes that will support you wherever you are in your journey. And now back to our show.
I want to go into your experience living with bipolar disorder and then being on medication and then having to go off of medication and actually navigate motherhood and marriage, not medicated. That's got to be challenge upon challenge.
Yeah, it was, I was diagnosed. I'm currently 36. I always have to remember, like, how old am I? I'm currently 36. I was diagnosed when I was like 21, 22 with bipolar 1 disorder.
Okay.
And I was misdiagnosed my whole life. I was put on antidepressants, which made my highs higher and my lows lower, made me suicidal when I was not a suicidal human. The decision for me to get off my medication was a very controversial one, because there are studies that say, oh, it's fine. It's only a 10% chance that, or I don't know the percentage. Don't quote me on the percentage, but a certain percentage where you would get a cleft palate, right? Well, I have friends who have had cleft palates, and that has totally messed with their entire mental health, their entire life, and having to get surgeries. And it's something I don't want to risk. And you know what? Like, there's already so many risks in pregnancy. Like, I just didn't want to do it. So I had spoken with my doctor, and my doctor, we had gone through a whole program where it took like 6 months, where I, went down milligram by milligram, day by day, week by week, month by month. And I was very lucky. I got pregnant right away. And my first trimester was great, other than feeling an aversion to sourdough bread and migraines, which were fine. And the second trimester was terrifying for me, because I had been told by everyone in my life, oh, the second trimester is the best. It's when you finally feel like yourself again, and you're happy, and it's fun, and it's like, it's great. And for me, I was experiencing torture and trauma the whole second trimester, because that's when my, manic episodes were kicking in. So I was so confused why this was supposed to be the best time, but I was having these episodes. And that's when the stress of a marriage came in. That's when, all kinds of things came in. Third trimester, I was great. Had a baby, had a traumatic experience, but I didn't realize how traumatic it truly was till I was in and out of the hospital, having to breastfeed on a wheelchair in the valet of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, because they couldn't bring her in.
Born in the I'm doing the math. Was she born not in the pandemic,
No,
but just after, just post?
Just after.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Just after. There was some other thing that, not bird flu, but something else came through, and it was unknown diseases were inside the hospital. So they wouldn't let her inside. This was 10 days postpartum in the emergency room. And then they were like, well, you have to formula feed her. And it was a formula shortage. And I was like, no, I will go in and out of this hospital. I will walk out. I don't care if I'm bleeding on the floor. I'm going out there. So there were so many things that were happening that, were hormonal. Who knows if it was the reason why it would cause manic episodes, or about to cause a manic episode, or was it just pregnancy and hormonal? I don't know, but it put a lot of stress on my marriage, because I was so frustrated, and I just wanted to be the best version of myself for my child and give all I could. But then, little things here and there would just make me spiral, and I would say that I didn't realize I had such severe postpartum anxiety until recently, when a car almost hit me when I was pushing my baby, and it was a neighbor's mother. And no apology, and it was caused a huge fight in the middle of the street, and she said it was my fault. It was just crazy.
She's the car, and you're the mom pushing a stroller.
Fed up after, yeah. But it was really terrifying. I completely lost it. I came back to the house, and I was debilitated for about 3 days. I couldn't move. Yeah. I was shaking. I was crying. I saw, blood on the ground. I saw, every visual that a new mom experiences, which I had before, but I thought I'd finally gotten over it. It all was triggered again, elevated. And a friend of mine had reached out and seen a video that I posted on my Instagram where I was just crying because I didn't know what else to do. And she recommended neurofeedback therapy. Mm-hmm. And I did 6 sessions in 3 weeks. And I went from, I'd say my anxiety was at 100, and now it is at maybe a 25, a 20.
Wow.
I mean, It was the most remarkable thing. And I recommend that to anyone. And it kind of made me think, if there was ever something that my husband said that would piss me off originally, where it would take me to 100, I kind of just like threw it away at this point, where I was like, it's not really relevant to me, and it's not going to, the reaction's not going to help me out, and it's not going to help our situation out. So I realized it was the stress of everything that was causing all this strain of mental illness. A lot of women, there have been studies that have come out where a lot of women, their pregnancies trigger their bipolar 1 disorder, where they never knew that they were living with bipolar disorder, and a pregnancy brings it out in them. It's so wild how women think, postpartum depression is when you have to be depressed and sitting at home. They don't know about anxiety. They don't know the mood disorders. They don't know any of these things that's not talked about, where these could be reasons why your marriage is falling apart, because you are not you. You are not you. And that's okay that you're not you, but you need help. You need medicine. You need therapies. You need support systems outside of a marriage. There's a lot of things that will benefit you, in this situation. And so that's why I try to take my experience of, I have the best baby in the world. I have the coolest kid. Everyone loves her. I love her more than anything in the world. She's great. The problem was inside of me, and it was not even a problem. It's just something that I need to work through, with support and with help. And it's okay to ask for help. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. And that is something that you said on my podcast that has been in my head all day, every day, is I had asked you, what happens if someone has a mental illness? Because truth be told, that's something that I've always been scared of, even before this marriage, like my whole life since being diagnosed, of, everyone's always threatened me. It's always been my fault that I live with a mental illness, or I had a boyfriend who cheated on me and I had found out it was because I was crazy. I lived with a mental illness. Right. So this is something that's always been a fear. So when I had asked you on my show, can the judges use that against you in a custody situation? And you said, no, if anything, it's a good thing, because it means you've identified the issue. You are getting the help. Here are the resources. Here are the doctors that can vouch for you. Here are the people in your life, and it was like, wow, like it's not a bad thing. It's a positive thing. It means that I've identified and I'm working on myself, and how wonderful.
Yes. Right. And, of course, judges in Florida might, have different
or
take
California
on that.
Even. I mean, honestly,
sure. I mean, look, it always depends on the judge, which is terrible. But for the most part, you would certainly make the argument, look,
sure.
I mean, the stigma is decreasing by the day. We're just talking about now, I don't know if you're following this, but I heard on NPR this morning that there's a big hearing with the Transportation Safety Board and the FAA about, because, pilots are not allowed, if pilots are on medication, they're not allowed to fly. So which is why that guy had that mental breakdown when he tried to take over the plane a few months ago, was because he was suffering from serious issues, mental health issues. Yeah. And he was afraid to get help because he would lose his career.
Right.
So there are pilots flying airplanes that are that are unhinged, because if they were to go and seek treatment, they would lose their careers.
Well, it's like the firefighters and police officers.
Right.
You can't have any, mental illness and be on any medication to be
right. So these people aren't seeking they're not seeking treatment. And so then they're fucking unhinged on the job. So, we're shifting away from this. So now they're actually having a hearing. I think it was today about this with the FAA. They're trying to be like, this is insane.
Yeah.
You're making people who need help. You're making people worse, and putting the public in danger. But really, you're punishing people for seeking treatment for something that is treatable.
which is a treatment. And look, I always use the thing, like, you wouldn't tell someone not to put a brace on their leg if it was broken. You wouldn't tell someone, oh no, you can't get fixed because you have diabetes or you have cancer.
Don't get an x-ray. Don't get an x-ray. You'll lose your job.
It's like, what are you talking about? And like, look, there have been many situations where I've been told by people in the business that I shouldn't talk about my mental illness, that it's going to label me as a diva and difficult to work with. But you know what? Honestly, like, it came to a point where I was like, I don't care. I'm not the only one that's suffering. I had heard so many people talk about it so openly and bravely. And I was like, it's time to talk, to scream this. And then I, was really lucky because People Magazine was the one that announced my pregnancy. And they did it in a way where we talked about mental health, mental illness, being off my medication, and really just being open and honest about it, because people need to know, like, I thought I was never going to have a kid because I couldn't get off my medication. And there was a right way to do it.
Right. And you struggled, right? That you struggled through it, but it wasn't impossible.
It was not impossible at all. And in fact, it's like hard to tell. Was it the medication? Was it the
hormones?
Bipolar disorder? Was it the hormones? I don't know, because I have talked to women who have no history of mental illness in their family, with themselves, and they experienced very severe dark times like I did. And they did not know that what they were experiencing was a mental health crisis. I'm very lucky that I know what that looks like to identify it.
Now that the hormones have, kind of settled a little bit, it's 17 months, right? And you're still breastfeeding, so you're still not on your meds. How are you feeling?
You know what? I feel great. And I don't know if that's the right thing to say or the wrong thing to say, but right now I've been feeling
it's the truth. Yes, it's your truth.
And a lot of people get mad at that, I think, because
why?
Because I feel like some, people feel like you need to be on medicine. And if you're saying you're great and you're not on medicine and you have a mental illness, then it's like all manic and all this. So,
I see. Yeah.
But I will say, at the moment, I am feeling fantastic. I do have my days, but there has been nothing that has been fearful or scary for me or manic episode-ish, even at anything. The only thing that I felt was severe postpartum anxiety, which I'd never experienced anxiety like this before. And then it was, re-triggered by someone trying to run me over. So,
right.
That, what did I do? I went and I got help immediately for it. Within 3 days of the situation happening, I had done something about it. So medication will come back into my life, once I finish breastfeeding and I reassess, and there may be a point where I don't need the same amount of milligrams. I mean, it is constantly a conversation with the doctor, figuring out where I am. That's pregnant, not pregnant. That's constantly
That's just life. Like we're constantly changing. Our bodies are changing. Our hormones are changing. Like over time, what we need changes.
That's right.
I'm wondering, do you have sort of systems in place with either your therapist or your husband, even, like, you've got people in your life who are going to say, hey, I'm observing that maybe, right? Because it's when we're in our own shit, like certainly in a manic episode, right? You don't have any much perspective. In a depressed episode, we don't have perspective either. But like, there are people in your life that you have guardrails. Right.
And I would say my guardrail is my mom, because my mom was the one that saw me pre-medication, medication, post-medication, all of that. Yeah, where my husband had never seen a manic episode. He didn't know what it looked like. So there would be times where I would be really just like, oh my God, I need to clean the house and I need to do this and I need to do that. And I need to go on a drive right now. And he'd be like, oh my God, she's manic. And my mom's like, no, do not project that on her. Like, that's not what this is. You don't know what this looks like. That is a hormonal mother who's nesting. So
right.
But it is interesting because it would frustrate me when he would project that. And I'm like, no, that's not what it is. I know what it is. My mom knows what it is. Very hard to explain unless you've been in that situation. So it's of no fault of his own, but it's very hard because that is something that happened my whole life, is people would project things onto me that weren't there, and so that's a very
trigger for
sensitive
you.
thing for me. It's a nerve that's a trigger nerve. I am very lucky because I'm very in tune with myself. Even when I'm out of tune, I know when something's off.
Yes.
And so even if I may be like, I don't know how extreme it is, I know to ask for help. I know.
Yes.
I know.
Good.
And that happened, with the car, I was so anxiety ridden and debilitated for those 3 days where I knew this is going to turn to something bad. So I need to get this fixed.
Right.
Because I don't know what direction I'm going to go in.
And again, like that awareness, that self-awareness, being able to like call it and see it and feel it and name it and then seek the treatment and seek the help is like, it's everything, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering what advice you have for people who are in a relationship with someone who clearly has some form of mental illness and is not doing anything about it. And it's really damaging the relationship.
That is the one of the hardest things one of the hardest positions you could ever be in. Because if you are someone that's in the relationship and you see that your partner is struggling, you want to be their support system. You want to be there for them, but you also can't be the one that forces them to, let's go to an extreme situation, right? You can't be the one that says you have to go into a mental health facility or I'll leave you. You cannot give the ultimatum, right? Because at this point, you're an adult. You can do I think it's still called the 5150, if there's, they're threatening suicide, you could put them away for 72 hours. I think that's still what it is. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
But, don't hold me to that, but I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it is too. Yeah.
You can do that, but if you're not in that extreme, right, it's not that far. The best way that you can do is never make someone feel like they're crazy. Never make someone feel like they're bad because they're feeling the way that they do. Don't make them feel like an animal in the zoo, right? Be the support system and say, hey, I've been having a really off day. It happens to me. I feel like maybe you're having some off days. If you want, I found some places that, have helped some other friends of mine, or maybe, here's some recommendations of doctors or therapists. Or if it's to a point where you're contemplating divorce over this because they won't seek help, you can just be truly, I think the best thing to do is to be honest and be like, I'm really struggling trying to be in a relationship where you don't want to get the help and I've gotten the help to help us. I ask you, please, for the sanity of yourself and for the sanity of just getting better as a person, like to make yourself feel better so you want to live and you want to have a great day, try something out, see if it'll help, maybe go to this doctor, maybe go to this specialist, listen to this podcast. I always say a really good way for people to make someone not feel crazy is say, oh my God, I heard this podcast today. This person was talking about this. And there were a lot of, things where I was like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Point them in the direction of my podcast. I have a lot of people that come on, talk about mental illness, talk about struggles. I think that that's a really good way of you can find, or I read an article and like for me, Carrie Fisher was one of the first celebrities that I had ever heard talk about bipolar disorder. And like, it made me feel not crazy because there was someone else out there that was successful, that had the career that I love and I admired, that did it.
Right. And is cool as fuck.
And it's the fucking coolest. So, if you can approach it in a very, you're not the animal in the zoo that I'm watching.
Right. Yes. And it's like not like the conversations are not to be had in frustration and like when you're at the end of your rope, right? These are conversations where
leave little crumbs, and don't let it get to the extreme. And if it is at that extreme point and there's no turning back now, then you just, try to say, I heard this podcast. It was really interesting, and this person's marriage was saved because they went and got this help. I don't know. Maybe it's something that we can see, would work for you. When you feel like, your partner and your parents and your friends are all like going behind your back and talking about it, it makes you feel like you're an insane person. right? And,
It's yes, right,
and it
right.
makes it worse.
And you're resistant to getting help, right? You become increasingly resistant.
Trustworthy, like you don't trust these people. You're supposed to be my partner. I'm supposed to trust you. Just remember that.
Right. I think it's important to remember that the other person is suffering.
And maybe is not aware.
Or maybe is not aware. Right. Yeah.
Because there's delusions too, with some mental illnesses, and I think
lot.
That's really
I know.
hard.
And that's what's so hard. I think a lot of people deal with is, and also, my audience is mostly women, and I see this so often in relationships where the husband is not getting help. And there is just still so much stigma around men and mental illness or therapy, just therapy, right? Mental health, right? Yeah. But it's fucking killing them. They're dying at earlier ages. They're shooting up schools and hospitals and wherever the fuck they shot up this week because they're not getting the help that they need.
Well, and that's why I think, especially with men, I think it's always good to show an example of maybe someone that they would be a fan of or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's struggling. Like maybe you look up athletes that are struggling with their mental illness. I know Michael Phelps is like a huge supporter. Kevin Love, the basketball player, is a huge supporter. I think if you could say oh, I read this article where Michael Phelps was talking about depression and Kevin Love talks about, he's an amazing athlete and he has this great organization called the Love Foundation. I think it's called the Love Foundation. Oh, now I'm like, oh my gosh, is that what it's called? But
it should be. It should be. That makes sense.
But he was talking about how he was in the NBA finals. And that was when he had his first panic attack, when he was on the bench about to go and play. And I think it's really cool because you see this guy and he's like such a dude, right? And you're like, right. Oh my God, so bro, so masculine, and here he is bringing such awareness. So I think that's another cool way is look up what athletes, look up what businessmen talk about that.
And what speaks to them, right? What is there, right? If he's like a bro athlete, go that direction. If he's a corporate, whatever, go that direction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I feel we could talk all day. We've talked twice this week and I want us to do it again.
I'll come back on whenever you want.
I love it. Where can people find you and your work and your podcast and all of the things?
Well, they can find me at Alessandra Torresani, which is a mouthful, but if you Google my name and Instagram, how phonetically you think it is, it will come up. And my podcast is called Emotional Support, and you can find it at emotionalsupportpod.com, at emotionalsupportpod, on the Instagram. And it's great. We talk all about mental health, mental illness, pregnancy, postpartum. It's a little bit of everything. So it's great.
It's great. You're great. I'm so happy.
And you're going to be on the pod and the episode's awesome. And it's really fun. And it's the first time I talk about really, truly what is divorce? What does it mean? What, when you should do the D word.
Right. Thank you so much, Alessandra. I adore you. I'm so happy to have had you here, and we'll do it again.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.